Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second joint webinar, Advancing Food System Security from Early Signals to Systemic Resilience. My name is Natasha Vlahu from Resos Branch, partner of the EFF-CoP project, and I will be your moderator today. Let me start by informing you that this event is being recorded. So today's webinar brings together 4 Horizon Europe projects: SecureFood, EFF-CoP, Act for Food and Defense Food for the second time. Although each project approaches food system resilience from a different perspective, they all share the common goal of strengthening Europe's capacity to anticipate, prevent, and respond to food safety, food fraud, and food defense challenges. Before we begin, I would like to encourage everyone to actively participate. We will have an interactive poll 2 times. We have a discussion session for your questions. You can use the chat by directly messaging, and I will mention what you have entered, and also you can raise your hand. We will start first with the first poll for you. So please let me share my screen. I suppose you can see my screen. If you could all scan the QR code on your right, and I will just give you a second. People are still joining, so I'm waiting a little bit. Okay. So are you ready? Let's start with the first question. You can directly put your inputs. So when you hear food system resilience, what is the first word that comes to mind? Okay, we have some input. Okay, we have traceability, strength, robustness, quick recovery, security, anticipation, sustainability, profitable, availability, safety, and traceability. Anticipation is coming up more, transparency. Safety also. Okay. Thank you very much for your input. I'll move on to the second question. What is the biggest blind spot in food system preparedness, and what is the most urgent action needed to address it? Feel free to enter your input here as well. Data interoperability. Data is coming up. Transparency. Cybersecurity. Traceability, lack of synergy. Transparency again. Climate change, lack of awareness, contacts. Okay, I see no more input. We will revisit this input after our speakers complete their presentations. Behavior culture, disability also, again. Underestimating intentional threats, administrative burden. Okay, we will revisit this question after the presentation as already mentioned. So I'm going to stop sharing the Mentimeter. Of course, you can continue putting your input. Okay, we will start now with the presentation. So our first speaker is Peter Olsen, a senior scientist at Nofima. Peter is an expert in digital technologies for the food industry with a particular focus on information logistics, traceability, product documentation, and sustainability. He has led to the development of international standards for seafood traceability and has contributed to numerous European research projects on food traceability, authenticity, and sustainability. And today he will present a topic: when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Why analytical methods only solve part of the food fraud problem, and what other approaches are needed. Peter, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I promised a slight bit of a rant in the LinkedIn comment addressing this, and let's see if we can live up to that.
We cannot hear you, Peter.
Yes,
you are
Peter,
muted.
Muted, yes.
Camera, sorry, here we are. And back to that one. Thank you. I promised a slight bit of a rant in the LinkedIn advertisement for this event, and let's see if we can live up to that. So, as was mentioned in the introduction, I've been part of lots of food traceability and food authenticity projects for at least 20 years. And here is a sequence of observations or statements that I've certainly heard in many iterations and variations in these projects I've been. I mean, there's a lot of people who have the sort of starting point that they have a method that they have invested a lot in, personal time and maybe also money for the lab. And I think they think the method has many excellent and underdeveloped applications, which is probably true. And then they spot a problem that they think their method can help solve. And then suddenly they regard their method as the solution to the problem. This is a famous fallacy. It's called the golden hammer. It was identified by Maslow in 1966, and it is basically what I gave the title of the presentation from. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, because this is false reasoning this way. I'm not saying analytical methods are useless, and I will hopefully make a presentation where we'll find a place for them, but it's not true that analytical methods with focus on identifying biochemical properties are the sort of our main tool in the fight against food fraud, is my argument. You are, of course, free to disagree. Part of the reasoning behind this, if we look, this is an old classification, but it's sort of fairly suitable for the purposes here. This was Spink and Moyer, who 15 years ago wrote a paper about food fraud incident types. So I'm not going to go through them. This is not what this presentation is about, but let's just evaluate analytical methods. Adulteration. Can analytical methods detect adulteration? Yes, absolutely. That's definitely what analytical methods are good at. What about the next one? Tampering. The legitimate product and packaging are used in a fraudulent way. Well, sure, some of the fraud of that type can be detected by analytical methods, but equally, certainly, some of the fraud of that type certainly cannot. It doesn't have an analytical component. What about overrun? Production made in excess of production agreements? No, there's no analytical component in that. What about theft? No. Diversion from the market where it should be, like smuggling? No. Simulating a product? Well, sure, the analytical methods can help with some aspects of that, but other aspects it can't really. And the same is true for counterfeiting. So the right-hand margin here, I am stating that analytical methods is good. They are good at some things. They can contribute to other things, and they are not at all relevant with respect to some of the most important types of food fraud, because I'm not going to go into this now, but some of the types of food fraud that are increasing the most have to do with things like sustainability and ethics and exact origin and so on, which is something you can't really detect with analytical methods. So let's try and find a place for everyone here. Let's start with the area where many of my colleagues are coming from. I'm not one of them, but from the area of food safety, which I know we'll have presentations on, which is unsafe food, which is bad, and we want to prevent it. But then let's move to food authenticity violations, where we have inauthentic or misdescribed food. There was, as many of you know, a European standard published fairly recently about all definitions, including for authenticity and authenticity violations and so on. And let's immediately split this into two parts, where you have deliberate violations of food authenticity, and then you have accidental, because stuff happens. And as you might know from the definition of food fraud in this European standard, this is more or less how we define food fraud. It's a deliberate violation of making a discrepancy between what it says or what you have a right to expect that a food product is and what you actually say it is. So this is the food fraud part. And it's important. I mean, you can clearly see it from the diagram, but it's important to remind ourselves that food fraud is not a branch of food safety. Food safety problems always have a biochemical component. I mean, otherwise they wouldn't be contaminated. They wouldn't have a potential to poison you or to make you ill. So analytical methods are fantastic for food safety. Food fraud incidents cannot necessarily be detected analytically, as we saw from the slide with the categories. Food safety violations are almost always unintentional. I mean, there is such a thing as bioterrorism, but really, there are very few cases reported of anyone deliberately committing a food safety violation. Food fraud, on the other hand, by definition, is always intentional. The intentional part is part of the definition of food fraud. Here's an important realization. The food fraudster does not want to cause a food safety incident. That's sort of not part of his or her business model at all. That would be bad. That would be so. I'm not saying they're diligent in protecting against food safety incidents, because they're probably not all that diligent when they're committing fraud, but they certainly don't want it. An important thing in practice is also that if you detect the food safety issue, the food producer will collaborate immediately, because this is really bad and they want it out of the system. They want to do the recall. They want to have clean products on the market and safe products on the market as soon as possible. However, if you detect a food fraud issue, you will not get collaboration from the ones who are involved at all. And finally, it's important to remind ourselves that the victims are very different. The victim of the food safety incident is clearly the consumer. The consumer, as we all know, might die, might become very ill, might be hospitalized, or might get have some really bad days and a bad stomach and be ill and so on. However, I will argue that the main victim of a food fraud incident is not the consumer who sort of eats one type of fish or meat and thinks it's another, if there's no food safety incident involved. The main victim is the legitimate producer in this case, because they are doing everything right, producing the legitimate, authentic product, and they are undercut in price, and sometimes they are very pressured on margins, and sometimes they even go bankrupt. They are the real victims. So all this is a long reminder to ourselves that food fraud is not the same as food safety, although there is, as we see, a small overlap. So let's draw a line here. To the left of this dotted line, you have anything you can detect by analytical methods, which is everything to do with food safety, and to be quite honest, a small part of what has to do with food fraud. On the right, let us admit that the type of fraud that we have to the right of this line, and I'll give examples, cannot be detected by analytical methods. So let's first see what we can detect. Things like species, geographical origin very broadly. I mean, the sort of what part of the world it comes from the wild, fresh or frozen, presence of bioactive compounds, of additives, and lots of examples of fraud/safety incidents like dioxin in Belgian chicken feed, cadmium, Sudan red, nitrite, horse meat scandal, and so on. But let's also look at the more and more prevalent properties that are subjected to fraud that we can't really expect analytical methods to detect. Things like volume, weight, amount, value, batch number, using the same batch number again, or exact owner, origin, country of origin, has to do with tax and customs, eco-label status, other value-adding labels, organic status, halal, kosher, not to mention properties relating to sustainability and ethics. And this is where food fraud is growing, these areas, because of the value-adding properties it has to say something, to have a product that comes across in a good light with respect to sustainability, ethics, and so on. So, trying to give a sort of responsibility to all this, how can we detect or prevent food fraud? Well, the default approach, which has dominated in all the projects I've been part of in 20 years in this area, and certainly in all our sister projects, is to say I'll detect fraud by taking a sample of the food, and I will determine the chemical, physical, or sensory characteristics of the samples. And find your favorite method here. Many of you are very strongly connected to one, or normally one, but sometimes a few of these methods, and they're probably wonderful, but they can only solve part of the problem. Let's try and find how we can deal with the type of food fraud that cannot be detected by analytical methods. Well, I would say there are two main ways. One is to analyze the supply chain, look for discrepancies in recorded data. And we have some sort of keywords, or maybe let's even call them methods that we use. We do supply chain mapping and analysis in itself. We do something called input-output analysis, and we do mass balance accounting. The last one might be familiar to you. So supply chain mapping analysis, this was a project that ran a few years ago called EU-China Safe, where we did extensive mapping of the wine supply chain going from Europe to China. And I'm not saying discovered, but things like if you export wine directly from France to China, there's a 48% tax. However, if you export wine from France to Hong Kong, there's 0% tax. And then there is extensive and systemized smuggling. This is the sort of analysis we can do to find out why, because this is a fact we knew, why twice as much French wine is traded in China as is legally exported to China. So to find out about this, we need to analyze the supply chain. We can do input-output analysis. This is for fish. This is a complicated diagram that you're not meant to read, but let me just say, going on in the columns there are lots of documents that are available in the supply chain. And going on the rows, you can see what data is recorded in each document. And anytime you have several X's in a row, you can do comparisons. You can say, okay, this was the reported landing date and time for this batch in this document. Aha, here they have a different landing time or a different vessel or a different product type idea or a different species even, or a catch date. So going through documents and matching recorded data to recorded data that's supposed to be the same. Sometimes, of course, you have to do aggregation. This is an example of aggregation. This is input-output analysis. Here we regard ourselves in Norway as being quite law-abiding, but this is real data from a certain period of time. This is amount of tons landed into the 4 regions, and here is used or sold, exported. And you can ask questions like, how come you landed only 62,000 tons and you managed to export 67,000 tons? That is weird. I'm not claiming this is fraud in itself because that would be unpopular, but it certainly warrants an investigation when the output is much larger than the input. This we also do when we do master balance accounting, but then we look at the process. We do a process, for instance, here filleting, and a certain company might say, and this has happened in practice, that they received 10 tons of raw material and they produced 8 tons of fillet. I don't think you need to be a fish expert or biologist to understand that there's absolutely no way you can get 8 tons of fillet from 10 tons of raw material of whole fish. So for many of these processes, we have sort of norms of what on an extremely good day it could be possible to produce, and then we compare the numbers to the norm, and then we identify suspicious data going here. The final thing I'll mention, and this is certainly not something I'll go into, but detect or prevent food fraud, we can get a part of the way if we prevent the data from being tampered with. If we document origin transformations, ensure integrity of recorded data, that's a whole lecture in itself, but certainly the word blockchain will figure. Blockchain is a database which is online, distributed, synchronized. It's encrypted and immutable, and the immutable part is quite important. And I have given lectures and there have been written papers and books about the suitability of blockchain as database for recording information in a supply chain, and certainly a food supply chain. This is it doesn't solve all problems, and it has some problems associated with it, but this is one problem it does solve. It is immutable. You no longer have the ability to fiddle with data afterwards. So this was my attempt to sort of limit the enthusiasm of people who have their favorite method and trying to prevent them in the future from thinking that they can solve all of food fraud problems. Because we have to realize, while there are some overlap, food fraud incidents are very different from food safety incidents. Many food fraud types do not involve a biological component. The main other approach to food fraud detection involves identifying discrepancy in recorded data. And if we want to fight food fraud, and I think that is an interest we have in common in all of us in this entire group, it is important that we start with the problem. We shouldn't start with the method. Let's start by analyzing the problem, and then afterwards we can find the method. This is, of course, something we do in FCoP, which is the project that I come from here, and we are doing things like good practice recommendations and so on. I'm not going to present that, but let me just say that in FCoP, we certainly realize that both these approaches are needed if we want to prevent and detect food fraud and solve the problem that we all agree should be solved. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. Very nice presentation, actually. I'm gonna move on with SecureFood representative. So it is my pleasure to introduce Anna Vetsu. She's a research engineer in the Research and Innovation Department at Practice. Anna is actively involved in European research and innovation projects and has played a key role in developing the Secure Food Systems Resilience Management Framework, from redefining user requirements and KPIs to supporting its evaluation and validation. Today, she will present Food Systems Resilience Management Framework. Anna, thank you for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the introduction. Shall I share my screen?
Yes.
So you can see my screen, right?
Perfect. Thank you, Anna.
Yes. Thank you very much. As you mentioned, I am Anna Vetsu, representing Empractice, a partner of the Secure Food project. Today, I will introduce you to the Food System Resilience Management Framework, one of the key outcomes of the Secure Food project. But first, some words about the Secure Food project. The Secure Food is a 42 months Horizon Europe research and innovation project funded under Horizon Cluster 6 2023 FARC to Fork Call 1 with a budget of almost 8 million euros and a consortium of 25 partners, organizations and their affiliated institutions from across Europe. The goal of the Secure Food is to strengthen the resilience and security of food system through an integrated system approach that brings together all stakeholders across the food supply chain to develop knowledge, digital tools, and collaborative approaches to enhance and support their preparedness, informed decision, and of course the overall resilience of their food systems. So beginning, as we all know, food systems are facing increasingly complex and interconnected risks, and traditional reactive approaches are no longer enough. So there is a growing need to identify early signals and create effective anticipatory approaches. So this webinar brings together different components that enhance these challenges and could address this through the resilience management, food fraud prevention, or cybersecurity in food chains and food defense and early warning system. Secure Food contributes by providing a structured approach that helps stakeholders move from reactive to crisis towards anticipating risk and building a more resilient food systems. And here comes the Food System Resilience Management Framework that translate this shift from reactive to anticipatory resilience into practice. So the Food System Resilience Management Framework helps stakeholders to understand, assess, and strengthen their resilience food systems. Has a twofold application. First, provide guidance for the development of national plans on food systems resilience, and then provide guidance for the development of resilience plans at the level of individual food actors. So starting with the guidance for the development of national plans on food system resilience, we suggest, let's say, two process steps that helps authorities to enhance and create their own national plans. So starting with the conceptual foundation of food system resilience that each national plan should understand and identify what means resilience for each their country, and then continue with a strategic framework for food system resilience that articulate its objectives, its governance arrangement, and the policy measures to have these all clear and identified. Then another important step is the risk assessment methodology in order to identify the critical entities that has each country and needs support and to create their efforts and their resilience. Then a national plan should address an institutional framework and coordination that secure the coordination between sector-specific aspects, and also to support the food sector actors in order to create their own resilience plans. These could be through mechanisms, through guidelines or digital tools. And at the end, we have the cross-border cooperation between the different authorities. And of course, at the end, a national plan should ensure a mechanism that regularly monitoring, report, and continues improve all these approach. Continue with the guidance for the development of resilience plans at the level of individual food actors. Before enacting the apply security and resilient measures, it is essential to first conduct a risk assessment analysis. The purpose of this step is to understand what needs protection, identify the relevant threats and vulnerabilities, and assess the potential impact of these disruptions. So we suggest a risk assessment methodology in order to enable the food actors to prioritize their action based on the risks and to ensure that the resources are allocated where they are most needed. And of course, to apply the proper resilient measures. So we suggest technical, organizational, and operational measures applied before, during, and after an incident occurs. We organize these measures into organizational measures and technical and operational measures. Starting with organizational measures. The organizational measures follow a management system approach. In simple terms, this means that the resilience is managed as a continuous circle in which the activities are planned, implemented, monitoring, and regularly reviewed and improved. To make this approach practical and easy to apply, we have break down this resilience circle into 9 dimensions. Each dimension focuses on a specific aspect of resilience circle and provides recommended actions. These recommended actions are further organized into 9 common topics to keep the framework simple and consistent to follow. Continue with the technical and operational measures. These approaches are different from the previous one. As we understand that the food system are very complex and different from each other, we separate the measures for each secure food supply chain, meaning that we provide and suggest different measures for grain, fruits and vegetables, fish and aquaculture, and milk and dairy case studies. And after that, we also provide measures for the different food actors in which supply chain. We try to address the high priority food security drivers for each supply chain. And this means that with the driver, meaning that focus on a factor or a condition that influence the state or dynamics of food security. These factors are negative or positive. We are focusing only on the negative drivers, and these will be environmental, economic, social, technological, institutional, or political. So for each supply chain, food actor, and driver, we suggest a set of measures to address before, during, and after disruption occur, short-term and long-term. So at the end, each food actor has a list of measures, both to address organizational, technical, and operational aspects and dimensions. And all this, we try to let's say, translate it into assessment questions to help them follow this framework in an easier way. So we digitalize all these measures to questions, and we have a digital tool that with easy questions that an operator can answer, and at the end measure effective their maturity level on their resilience. So at the end, we would like to consider any interest in participants in the call today to join Secure Food Extended Stakeholders Group. As the Horizon Europe project, we understand that these challenges are multi-phased, and of course, the critical role of you and your knowledge is very important for us. So please, if you are interested, you can still join our stakeholders group. This requires only a few hours from your time per year, and we'll be happy to you on board on our activities in order to ensure that what we develop, what our solutions are be, has also your knowledge and expertise and our broader community. So thank you very much for your time, and of course I'm here to answer your questions.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much. Of course, any questions, you can put your input in the chat or raise your hand. And also, we will have after all the presentations, we will have a discussion if there are questions.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Dr. Alberto Gare from the Universidad Politécnica de Cartagena, representing the Act for Food project. So Dr. Gare is an expert in food microbiology and the application of predictive modeling and machine learning to food safety. He has authored more than 80 scientific publications and received the 2024 Best Young Scientist in Food Microbiology Award. Today, he will present food safety management for digital food industries, updating hazard analysis and critical control points, and threat assessment and critical control points with cyber physical threats. Alberto, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So let me share my screen. Yes, so you should be seeing my screen, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, so thank you very much. So let me arrange. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, thank you very much. As said, I'm Alberto Garre. I'm from the University of Cartagena in Spain. And it's a pleasure for me to present the work we have been doing within the Act for Food project. It's a project funded by the European Union. So we started working on it in this January, pretty much. So as you can imagine, it's still some preliminary work we have, but it's I think we are already taking some interesting steps. So the reason why we are developing this project is because food, so the food supply chain, is becoming a critical digital infrastructure in Europe. And this is mostly due to the fact that this digitalization, these 4.0 industries, all this revolution that we are having in all industries, so that's also being applied to food industries. So we are seeing that pretty much every food industry have either already started putting more sensors, using IoT devices, using cloud computation, or they are still considering this. And we already have some evidence that there are some because we have some traditional systems to analyze and manage all the possible risks that we can have during food production, food distribution. But then now we have to also consider these new hazards and new risks that are related to this digitalization of the food industries. And for this, so if we go back and take a look at the different outbreaks and news that we have for related to food safety. So we see that we don't have to worry just about the conventional hazards, but then we also have some problems related to cyber attacks and all this so something related to the digitalization of the food industries. So and this is what we are doing within this Act for Food project. So we're still in the first year, so we are on pretty much at the beginning of the project, but the idea is to first update the way we do risk analysis and risk assessment in food industries to account for this digitalization. So we also account for these cyber physical threats. Then we also develop novel methods for the forensics that are based on these novel hazards and risks that we have characterized. and then also to develop a specific solution. So within this project, we have also some industrial partners that will be using these solutions. So then, because we are at the beginning of the project, we are right now focusing on the first outcome, that would be to do this risk assessment and threat assessment and hazard assessment related to these new cyber physical threats that we have within food industries. And we are not starting from scratch, because we have a fairly solid food safety systems. So then what we are using as a foundation for the project are the existing frameworks for hazard analysis, vulnerability assessment, and threat assessment for the determination of critical control points. So then the first one we are focusing on is the hazard analysis and critical control points. And what this on a nutshell, so what HACCP does is that it tells us what hazards we may have during the production or distribution of some food product, then how relevant they are going to be to the consumer or to the company, based considering both the probability of that hazard having an effect and what could be the severity of that effect. Then the HACCP also tell us how we are going to, so which ones are the most important to control, or the most relevant to control, and also how we are going to control them. So HACCP is already a standard, so we have an ISO. The FAO has plenty of guidelines on how to implement it. And this is something that is pretty much implemented in every food industry. And the output of a HACCP is going to be a list of critical control points. So the number of critical control points is going to depend a lot on the type of food, on the type of process, type of production. But for all of them, what we are going to have is this type of table that is going to give us a critical limit for this thing that we are going to measure, the way we are going to monitor it. Then if we are outside of those critical limits, so what is the corrective actions that we have to take? So are we going to reprocess a batch, do we have to dispose of a batch, or do we have to apply some other action? So that's defined as part of the output of a HACCP. Then also how we are going to maintain records of all these monitoring and interventions that we have been doing during the as part of this HACCP system. And then finally, what is the method that we are going to follow to verify that this HACCP is correct. And the thing is that the good thing with the HACCP is that it's based on very well-established knowledge. So it's a standard in the field. Every food industry understands how it works and how to apply it. But the problem is that this knowledge, so it has been gained from using, let's say, traditional food safety production systems. So the thing is that now, if we are going through a digital transition that presents a revolution in the way that we are making and distributing food, so then that is related to the higher reliance on sensors, cloud services. So then what we are posing is whether this HACCP that has been calculated based on these traditional knowledge or these traditional production methods, so whether they are still valid. Because if we have novel methods for monitoring, novel methods for recording, novel methods for verification, so it's possible that some of these critical control points are not critical anymore. It's also possible that we have new hazards that make that we have new critical control points. Then we have some unknown emerging hazards that will also alter what is critical and what is not. And then also how cyber threats interact with all these classical methods. So then our approach for this part of the project is that we are starting with some classical, so HACCP done the way that it has also always been done. So with that, we have a list of critical control points, how we are monitoring them, and how we are verifying that they are correct. And the reason why we are doing this is because we have some industrial partners. So within this project, we care a lot about translating these outcomes into industries. And we believe that taking this conventional when-long methodology is going to make it easier later to translate our results. So then what we are doing first is going towards this HACCP 4.0 that is not using just the conventional methodologies, but then also considering when we evaluate whether something is a critical control point, so what are the different sensors and the different novel ways of recording this information. And then we evaluate whether how this HACCP should be updated, and then once we have done it, then we incorporate what would be the threat assessment and critical control points and the vulnerability. So that we would put all these three conventional elements: the HACCP, the TACCP, and the BACCP, and then we'd have an overall assessment of food safety, considering the more classical hazards, but then also all the cyber physical threats that we can have. So within the project, we have 3 case studies because we want the outcomes of the project to be very, very specific, so very physical. So we are going to be working for aquaculture, that would be the primary production. Then for the dairy industries, that it's misspelled here, but then it would represent the processing, and then retail, a retail partner, that it would be for the distribution. So the work, the case study where we have done the most work so far is in the dairy industry. And then so what we have done is that we have used a model HACCP for milk pasteurization. So if you have seen as HACCP, you are familiar with this type of table, so you know that they are very large. And yes, so then what we have is for each one of these critical control points, so the hazard the phase where it applies, the hazard that is relevant, what is so a number for the critical control point, then what is the critical limits, the monitoring, the corrective action, the verification methods, and how we have the record keeping for that. So far, this is the way we have always been doing this type of analysis. So then once we have done the conventional HACCP, what we do is first a qualitative evaluation for each one of these elements that we use for that we are considering. So how it was the traditional surveillance and how we would do this surveillance 4.0 as part of this digitalization of food industries. So then once we have seen the novel methods that it could be digitalized, so then we do what we call an extended hazard identification. So the way we've approached this is, okay, so instead of using an analog sensor, if we use a digital sensor, what are the novel threats that we can have within this production system? And then based on that, what we do is that we identify some new potential critical control points that it's somehow an extension of the classical method. And then once we have, because we are into cyber physical, so then we look at what are the different sensing devices that could be implemented during the digitalization of these critical control points. And then so we go to the databases of known vulnerabilities for these sensors, and then we have this. So we compare all of them, and then we see what would be our recommended solution for each one of these. So what we have done is that we have done it for many sensors, many critical points. So then for each case study, we have a very, very long document, but the outcome so far that we have would be so for the milk pasteurization. So we have identified some new critical control points that could be critical control points. Then also we have identified some new known vulnerabilities that are linked to how these critical control points are monitored. So the work so far has been done for the milk pasteurization. So the next step would be to the application also this methodology that combines the 3 classical ones, so HACCP, BACCP, and SACCP, to the other 2 case studies, so for the aquaculture and the retail. And then also, because right now we have a lot of information, but we have to put all of it together. So then we would need to update what are the critical control points, and then to combine the probability and severity to have an update of this control system. So yeah, so then as you can see, so it's been 6 months of project, so then we are still working on it, but I believe we have developed this methodology that could incorporate we could adapt this HACCP and TACCP, threat assessment and hazard analysis methodologies for the digitalization of industry. So yeah, and then during the next months, we will have more specific results. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alberto. There is actually a question in the chat about the difference between the hazard analysis in critical control points and the threat assessment in critical control points. I know you mentioned, but maybe you want to comment some more about that.
Yeah. The thing is that because the ones who work in food safety, we are very used to seeing these words. So it's pretty much related to to one of the previous presentations, that the threats that we have are different in nature. So when we talk about threat assessment, so the TASA, so we often talk about intended alteration. So really about attacks. So this could be more about the defense of the food system. Whereas when we speak about the hazard analysis, so the HACCP, so then we are more rather talking about accidental, so accidents that may happen. So then it would be more about the food safety from a more accidents that may happen during food production. The problem is that within this project, because then if we through the digitalization, so then it opens the gate for different types of threats. So for the food the defense becomes a bit more. So then there are new threats that may become relevant, and then so the HACCP provides us a very nice framework to also evaluate what is going to be the severity of these potential attacks on the food safety, on the food supply chain, because it pretty much provides us a good indicator of what is going to be the impact on overall food production or the consumer.
Thank you for your answer. Actually, Jason Basura has commented output of HACCP. Frequently, those outputs are measured by an operational technology control, which could be lacking the perceived controls or protections necessary to prevent disruption or risk. And also, he has a question. Is HACCP 4.0 more of an unified food protection-based assessment, integrating all the three, let's say, points? This is a very holistic line of thinking that is included in the recently updated document, let's say. Maybe you want to comment on that.
Yeah. So we are going in that direction to, of course, having because right now it's very much separated, but now in the digitalization brings these possible cyber physical attacks much closer to the to HACCP. So I agree. We are going in that direction now.
That's great. Thank you, Alberto. Thank you very much. I suppose we can move on to our last presentation. So please join me in welcoming Akos Yosvaks from Syrian Research Institute. Akos is the head of food and nutrition science and AI at Syrian Research Institute in Budapest, Hungary. He is the scientific coordinator of the Defense Food Project, also leading the efforts on risk prediction and shock anticipation with computational methods. And today he will present from early signals to early warning, anticipating emerging food safety and food defense threats. Akos, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I will share my screen very quickly, and I hope you can see it.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So today I wanted to have a short introduction to the concepts related to early signal detection, early warning systems, horizon scanning systems, at least how we understand it. So let's start with the obvious, that food systems are highly complex systems. And it's not only in the meaning of everyday language being complicated, it's also complex in terms of complexity sciences, mathematics, and different adjacent scientific fields. It means that there are a lot of interacting components here, a lot of actors, a lot of products, a lot of flows of trade, but also a lot of flows of information and data, with a lot of feedback loops and a lot of highly unpredictable connections. Also, all these food systems are highly influenced by different drivers, among others, climate change or changing consumer attitudes and many other things, which makes or which all these drivers make these systems even more unpredictable in many ways. Also, the main challenges is that are that we don't know, by we I mean science, we don't know a lot of things related to these food systems. We usually don't know the true prevalence and probabilities of different hazards. We don't know all the hazards, we don't know all the food components, we don't exactly know how these different chemicals in our food, being contaminants or constituents of food, how they interact exactly with the human body, with the human biochemistry and physiology. And also there is a layer of complexity that besides these very natural science uncertainties or challenges, we also, when we make decisions or the decision makers make decisions, there are many elements of social sciences which come into play. There is a lot of debate in a decision-making situation around costs and ethics and values and many other things which are very hard to measure or quantify, or at least not with the same tools as the risks or hazards. So if we want to understand how a specific supply chain works, or we want to anticipate some of the new issues, it is a complex exercise with no standard solutions. That there are good practices and there are good methodologies how to do that, but it's, I think, a constant battle, which could be described as a continuous knowledge generation and knowledge update exercise, which, because of the complexity, is not that easy to do. When we would like to anticipate new issues and finding the next big thing in food safety or food security, there are many frameworks which we could use for help our thinking. One of the frameworks is this well-known matrix where we could classify our knowledge and meta-knowledge into 4 different areas. And I think many of you already know these. Just going through very quickly, there are the known knowns, which is the facts that we know, and we also know that we know them. So this is usually the institutionalized knowledge or the knowledge which in a scientific field we think that we know. This is probably less interesting than the 3 other categories. However, it is a big and very solid foundation which we need to build on. The other category is the unknown unknowns. So these are the things which we don't know, and we don't even know that we don't know them. These are very, very interesting, and these were interesting over history for many people, many scientists, to discover the truly unknown unknowns, which is probably even theoretically kind of impossible exercise. The 2 other are very interesting and very strange. One is the known unknowns, which is the things which we know that we don't know. So this is usually the research agenda, which we identify. So these are the blind spots, which we know that we need to do research there, we need to collect data because we don't know some details. And the counterpart of it is the unknown knowns. So these are the things which we knew probably before, some decades ago, but we forgot, or someone already discovered something, but it is not yet institutionalized knowledge. It is published somewhere in an obscure paper and we don't know about it. And this is a very truly interesting signal to our perception that what is hidden in the internet or in other sources. So when we try to anticipate new issues, usually many people would like to focus on the unknown unknowns, which are very similar to a phenomenon which is called black swans in mathematical statistics, which is a very rare events, but with a very profound effect on a system. However, usually these are very easy to spot post hoc, so after the event, but before the event, it's not that easy to really identify the unknown unknowns. But the two others, the unknown knowns and the known unknowns, these are the areas which probably our knowledge could benefit from identifying these and making them available and making them known knowns for further analysis. So, and this is the kind of a theoretical background a bit. How to do this? And there are, again, many frameworks and many ways to categorize it or to make it visible. But I like to work with these timelines of horizon scanning. Horizon scanning is an exercise where we collect data and information on multiple timescales and of multiple nature, and to try to make sense out of these. And the first and closest to us in time, the short-term issues, which are usually called early warning systems, the systems which handle these information, is about the things which are already happening. So these are already happening outbreaks, already happening incidents or attacks, where time is really important, and knowing about these events is extremely important for immediate decision making or immediate action. And usually here we could list as an example the Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed of the European Commission. But these are the things which are already happening. So we can't really prevent them, but we can immediately take actions, and it's still very valuable. The next time frame is about few months or probably few years into the future. These are the things which we can probably see or identify through screening various information out there in scientific publications, in patent databases, in grey literature, in news, in media, social media, which are the things which about to happen, not necessarily and for sure, but there is a high chance that some of these issues can grow into an actual incident or an actual outbreak. So this is what usually we call emerging risk identification. This is a medium-term assessment, and it helps the decision makers, whether they are authorities, risk assessors, industry, to prepare for these new upcoming risks. And the third timeline is even more far into the future, 10, 20 years, which we call the intelligence or knowledge gathering in this field as a foresight exercise, where we could analyze the different drivers and the trends and to see what is a plausible future scenario. And for instance, how climate change on a long run could influence some probabilities of some risks, or consumer patterns, or any other phenomenon, which would then have impact on the medium time frame and also consequently on a short time frame. All these time frames obviously are kind of it's an artificial separation and probably a bit didactic, but helps in also identifying that these three timelines differ very much in data and information availability, uncertainty, and also the tools which you can use for analyzing these timelines. But also they are deeply connected with each other. So a long-term driver will have sooner or later medium-term effects, which would manifest in increasing probabilities of some risks, or discovering some new risks, or a different spread of a vector of a disease because of climate change. So there will be an impact on the medium time frame, which will for sure have an impact on the shorter time frame. And from data analytic perspective, if you monitor all the information, for instance, in the RASF or in other databases on a short timeline, you could also identify some patterns which are changing over time, which would indicate a higher level change in the underlying risk phenomena. And when we try to identify these emerging properties or emerging issues, the question comes, what is emergence? And obviously there is no uniform definition for that. I just collected few from different dictionaries. But for our purpose, the most relevant is probably coming from the complexity sciences, which is An emergence is when a complex system exhibits collective behaviors or patterns that arise from interactions between the components. And usually these patterns or these changes of patterns could not be explained or detected by examining just a part of this complex system, but it is a truly systemic phenomenon. And apart from being systemic, there are two more important characteristics of emergence in our case, in food safety and security. One is time dynamics. So it is always a time factor in. So we observe a system and then after some time we observe again, and there will be some changes. And this change in itself is the emergence. So we need to have, to translate this, we need to have data for a longer time period and be able to compare states of systems over a longer time period to detect these emerging patterns. And the other important characteristic is the novelty. And the novelty is very much context dependent. So something might be new for me or my institution, but not new for another institution because they already knew about it. And this is like true for every situation. And this context dependence is one of the hardest parts to detect or automate or translate to data, because there is truly a difference. What is important for Europe might not be important for other regions, or what is important for a local business somewhere in Hungary might not be important for another business in Western Europe. So there are very profound differences between contexts of different people, experts, and institutions. And this is something what we need to also take into account. When we try to detect these emergent properties or novelties, there are traditionally, and again, this is probably very didactic again, but there are two profoundly different approaches to use here. One is to somehow imitate the human decision making, which is we read a piece of knowledge, probably a scientific paper, a publication, a news item, and we compare with our own knowledge and we say, oh, that's something new, that's something interesting, let's follow up on that. How you automate it, then you would need to have this innate database of the current knowledge compared to which a novelty could be defined. And it's very hard to do in practice, and was very hard to do in practice and was almost impossible. And in many cases, this resulted in keyword-based searches where someone would search for terms like new or emergent or upcoming, but it's not real emergence in many ways. The other approach is the complexity science approach, where we are agnostic of the content, the semantics, but we just somehow investigate emergent properties of a network. And according to this time dynamic analysis, we could pinpoint that what was changing, and this is probably worth looking at. And it's very robust because it's like semantic or knowledge agnostic. However, it lacks, for a very same reason, it lacks context, and it needs like very strong human interpretation. However, what changed in the last 2 years or so, that large language models, generative AI came, and the novelty and emergence in a contextual or semantic sense, now it's easier to do with all these models. And probably, and this is what we are working on, probably the two together, so the semantic-based and the emergent pattern-based definition, we need both. We need both to better identify and better anticipate what's happening really in a given field. And for emerging pattern detection, so the pattern-based complexity science-based approaches, we have many different tools which we could use. These are usually either network analysis or network science-based tools, which are very good at exactly evaluating or analyzing complex systems, or natural language processing based tools, which are good in identifying topics or different components, textual components. And these could be used for identifying emerging patterns. And also they are used by us, also they are used in the Defense Food Project. But there are many others, it's just a few examples for that. And all these serve slightly different purposes and look at the things from a slightly different angle, which also needs some sort of an interpretation. But still, they are very powerful tools in filtering down information from the huge noise which we get when we harvest all the information from the internet or from various sources. We'll have a lot of signals which are not really true, not really emergent. And in distilling down and getting rid of the noise, these methods are very good at. However, when it comes to the whole decision-making or analysis pipeline, what I would like to stress again, and probably it's a bit of connecting back to the first presentation of today, that like contextualization and you having this sort of knowledge on the actual field helps us to choose the right models, also to interpret the results of the models, and to provide this human expert element and context, what is usually missed by different network science and also large language model approaches. But a combination of data analytics, large language, conventional data analytics, and generative AI and human expertise probably is the right way to approach all these anticipatory problems. And in Defense Food Project, what we plan to do, as you may know, the project just started end of last year, and we are almost 1 year into. But what I wanted to share with you is that we have a specific work package 1 on risk prediction and shock anticipation, where we have few things what we are building currently, and I cannot yet show you anything, what is ready. But the plan is that we identify and understand the most important intentional threats to the food system and the drivers influencing these intentional threats. So defense food is about food defense questions and terrorism and intentional attacks, which were very slightly touched by the first presentation. And this is inherently different from both food fraud and conventional food safety, because the intentionality element and the element of causing harm makes like the whole system dynamic different, because there are different underlying drivers, behavioral drivers, socioeconomic, political drivers, psychological drivers, which will have a different effect. And we would like to map them and make a driver analysis and identify the root causes or a system of root causes, so to say. And the other task of ours is to identify and inventorize all the available data sources and tools which would help us in building up an ensemble tool or a toolkit for anticipation and early warning. We are well into that exercise. We also identified all our sister projects as valuable information sources for this, also some past projects which we participated in and building similar tools. The next step or an adjacent step to it that we would like to also use specific modeling tools and satellite data for early identification of mycotoxins and fungi infection on crop fields as a kind of an exercise or a use case when we could show that unconventional data could play a role in early anticipation and preparedness. And from all of these, as the last task in this work package, we will develop a dashboard which is focusing on these intentional threats, on food defense questions, and using these different timelines and different data sources, also embedding the driver analysis as like the very high level component of these timelines, to provide information to the end users on possible upcoming threats of the food chain. So this was it. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Akos. There is a question in the chat, actually, by Flavio. Do you know how much it would cost to put the systems into practice and who would be expected to pay for them? And also, where is the main risk concentrated in the supply chain? At producer level, processing level, or logistics and distribution?
Oh, thank you very much. These are all very nice questions. About the costs and who would expect it to pay for them. We didn't have that discussion. So as I said, we are very early in the project. So by design or by definition, this actual dashboard should be open to the general public. It's still, we need to take discussions and make discussions on not necessarily about who will pay for them or what is the business model, but rather how to restrict access. Probably it's not the right word, but how to make sure that only partners who have beneficent or benevolent intentions would use these systems. So it's more of a security and ethical discussion which we need to go through. But by design, this dashboard should be open. What are the main risks and where are they concentrating? It will depend on the actual use case, and I think it's not a very helpful answer, but the experiences or the data or information will suggest that there are multiple elements which will influence actually which part of the supply chain will be attacked. And this is like ease of access, also the magnitude of the damage which could be caused, and also ease of access to the actual agent, what could be deployed, and the properties of that agent. So all of these will influence that which part of the supply chain will be the highest risk. And this is also part of the driver analysis to better understand all these factors, because what I was mentioning, these are coming from just few literature and experience, but probably it's more than that. And probably these factors are also interconnected with each other. So this is also part of the driver analysis to have a better understanding on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Argos. And there is another question about slide number 9. Assessment of the potential threats is indeed critical. The term identification is used here, but absent the vulnerability assessment of the system, firm or actor. The description of risk is theoretical. Can you speak to the vulnerability assessment aspect of the risk modeling? It says slide number 9.
I'm not sure if this question is for me or the previous speaker, but I'm looking at
I'm sorry.
as well. No. Or is it to me? I can share the last slide. Okay. This is it.
It is for you. It says it is for you.
Yeah, it is for me. Okay. So let me have a look at the question again. Sorry for that.
No worries. You
So
can see the chat. Yes.
Yeah, I need to stop sharing to see the question. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, I'm resharing again. So the exposure part or the vulnerability part. That's right. And thank you for also identifying this. Because that's right. In work package 1, we at the beginning, so the first tasks, we will identify the threats and the drivers and less about exposure or the probability component of it. However, where the probability component comes in is also work package 5, where we work together with our partners, Ubuntu in the Netherlands and McGill in Canada, to also bring in vulnerability or probability exposure parts to it. And we try to find again, it will depend on the driver and will depend on the indicator describing the driver, that how we could approach this from a data analytical angle. But we are thinking about incorporating data on trade, on consumption, and depending again on the threat identified, there are multiple like surrogate or additional data sources which we are thinking about, like the actual reported data from member states on monitoring some of these threats. And these data are available through European Food Safety Authority for like the underlying exposure to different chemicals, and compared to this exposure, how an additional exposure would increase the risks. But that's one of the hard parts, and we are still in the ideation phase how to approach exposure and vulnerability and probability part of it. So, but this is how we try to do it. That we also will have data on the probability part or exposure part. Obviously, when it comes to an actual attack and an actual incident, then the actual data or information on the actual exposure, this is something what is different from the anticipation. But we could make some parts of it still available for analysis even without an actual threat being present, so to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we've heard a very nice presentation, very four complementary, let's say, perspectives covering resilience management, food fraud, digital food safety, and the early warning systems. So it's now time to go back to the poll, and if you can scan the QR code once more and reply to the same questions one more time. I'm gonna give a couple of minutes. Okay, so I'm moving on to now, after you've heard the experts' presentations, what would you say is the first word that comes to mind when you hear food system resilience? Okay, interdependencies. System awareness, complexity. Interdependencies. Okay, I will move on to the second part, that is the biggest blind spot in food system preparedness, and what is the most urgent action needed to address it. So here we had for the first round, we had a lot of answers that involved administrative burden, climate change, transparency, a lack of awareness, traceability. Data was an answer. Intelligence gathering beyond data and labs, information, IT tools and big data analysis, traceability, failure of imagination, supply chains again, infrastructure needed. Of course, we're going to use your input before the presentations and after to have some results. I'm going to wait another minute if there is any more input. Okay. Will to cooperation. Complacency. Of course, you can still give your input. The Mentimeter is open. I'm going to stop sharing. I don't know if there are any more questions for the speakers or in general. You can raise your hand or put the question in the chat. I don't see any questions. So I want to thank you very much. Special thanks to our speakers. As we come to the end of today's webinar, I would like, of course, to thank you all. The diversity of perspectives shared today clearly demonstrates that strengthening food system resilience requires collaboration across disciplines and projects. We hope today's webinar has generated new ideas and strengthened connections within our growing community of practice. I want to thank you again for your time and participation. We wish you a wonderful rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you in our next webinars and events. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much.